Tourism is a big part of the economy, represents approximately 1 in 10 jobs globally. In Africa, tourism represents about $60 billion a year in economic activity. It employs about 30 million people. In the case of many countries, one of the biggest earner of hard currency income for the country.
COVID-19 shut down phototourism across Africa overnight. The East African country of Kenya, where safari hunting is banned, is heavily reliant on the tourist dollar to fund conservation efforts.
We are an old family in safaris, 4 generations, over 100 years of safari, all based in Kenya. So we are operating in a group ranch wildlife conservancy called Odirikesi. We have a small conservancy of 7,000 acres and our camp, Cottars 1920s, is there. The area has great potential to be expanded into conservancies, going well out along the corridor between Masai Mara National Reserve and the Gurman Forest. It's about 80 kilometers away, and all of this is very critical corridor and habitat for elephants and wildebeest and of course all wildlife. COVID has stopped all tourism. This is of course a major challenge for us. The issues we are having is suddenly a drop in revenue and finance for our conservation leases and our community programs.
Tourism is probably the main private sector employer in and around important wildlife ecosystems, and all the economic input that comes from tourism salaries and local citizens spending their salaries in the villages and sponsoring micro enterprises, all that is gone. And that means a lot of people are going to shift to more unsustainable activities.
At the moment, we've kept our rangers, we've kept our cars going, so there's been no downside in any of that yet. The big problem will be when and if leases. Now we've been lucky, we paid the leases for this year, but should this carry on, we're looking at a shortfall for next year, and so that is more likely when we'll get an upsurge in poaching, hunger. If there's no money in the system, then they have to resort to bushmeat and that sort of thing. If we fail to meet our obligations, then the Maasai have no choice but to convert their land to agriculture, which of course land conversion is the primary cause of wildlife and habitat loss. The way the Maasai have always seen wealth and used the land is through domestic animals, goats, cows and sheep. So we may see an upsurge in goats, cows and sheep, which would be a tragedy.
Without government rescues for the airlines in developed countries, it's going to be very difficult to see tourism have any chance of survival. We believe it's going to be 12 to 18 months before people can reopen with sufficient travelers visiting to justify them being open. And it will take probably no less than 36 months before they're back to somewhat a normal amount of occupancy.
The bottom line is we must not rely on tourism only. We've got to find new and bigger sources of revenue.
Tourism cannot be the panacea that some people propose it is. It's not a solution for everything. Conservation doesn't have one size fits all. There's areas that had a lot of tourists and don't have any tourists today. Conversely, there's a lot of areas that are of critical importance for conservation that didn't have many tourists before. Areas like the Niassa Game Reserve in Mozambique, an area the size of Switzerland, areas like the many concessions with big game in the Central African Republic. Those areas were struggling to get any meaningful number of tourists before. The conservation authorities will suffer a massive shortage of funding. They are almost entirely dependent on park fees and concession fees, and those have evaporated overnight. And the governments don't have spare cash to bankroll those operating budgets. So that will translate into reduction in activity. And that means more free range for poachers, illegal loggers, illegal fisheries, etc.